Join us on this week's episode of Two Angry Men, where Mark Geragos and Harvey Levin discuss, is Donald Trump actually losing his mind over the Epstein files? Enjoy.
People want the Epstein files released. You cannot argue Donald Trump doesn't have something to hide. There is something he is so desperately trying to hide that he will do anything and even humiliate himself so that doesn't come out. Welcome to Two Angry Men. Mark, I think Donald Trump, whatever his legacy might be, he is fucking it up with Jeffrey Epstein. I think that what he has done in the last month, running so scared and making it so clear to the public that he has something to hide in these Justice Department files, that people are looking at Donald Trump in a way like they looked at Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon did a lot. You know, he opened China. He helped end the Vietnam War. All he's remembered for is Watergate. Donald Trump, if he doesn't turn things around immediately, and I don't think he's going to, is going to be remembered for Jeffrey Epstein.
Look, I am a lefty. I've always been a lefty. So in our bubble, I generally am not one to come and defend Trump, but I'm going to defend Trump. Number one, what Nixon and Trump both share in common is a guy by the name of Roger Stone. Roger Stone famously was convicted and then pardoned and has, I believe, Richard Nixon's face tattooed on his back. Roger Stone also learned some lessons from Richard Nixon. And one of the key lessons was you never apologize, you never back down, you're always on the offensive. Trump took that next level with Roy Cohn. He understands that. And he's been through, frankly, in my opinion, to have been indicted as many times as he was and still come back and now be president again, and to have James Comey in the dock, have Tish James in the dock, have Adam Schiff as a target, basically, and all of that. He has turned this around. It's one of the most epic political comebacks of all time.
That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You're right. No, you're right that it is that everything you said is true. I mean, when he said I could shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue and get away with it, I think at the time he was right. He could have, and he's done a lot.
He could have done more.
No, I know, and he's gotten away with it, and he can change history, and he has been able to make his base believe it. They don't believe it anymore. You look at what he tried to do with Lauren Boebert, where he brought her to the Situation Room to try and convince her, don't release these documents. And she said, bullshit. She said, I'm going to do it. He has lost his grip on MAGA, on the base, in Congress. They are going to vote overwhelmingly to release these files. And I think him rewriting history, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, ain't working with Jeffrey Epstein. It's not working with lowering costs where he says, oh my God, it's so much cheaper, everybody, just believe me. And I think that what you're talking about, never apologize, that's broke. He has broken it. He's broken it with what matters to people, which is money, and people want the Epstein files released. You cannot argue to me, you cannot argue that Donald Trump doesn't have something to hide. You know he does. There is something he is so desperately trying to hide that he will do anything and even humiliate himself so that doesn't come out. This episode of Two Angry Men is sponsored by Incogni. Personal information is more accessible than ever. Sometimes it's too accessible. Data brokers collect and sell your private details, your name, your address, phone number, even browsing habits, without you ever knowing. Your privacy should be yours to control. And that's why Incogni works behind the scenes to remove your data from these databases, reducing exposure to anyone misusing your information. Now, Incogni hunts down these unethical sites, and they get your personal information removed from the places that expose your private details. There are lots of benefits to Incogni. The first, you don't have to email anyone or fill out forms because Incogni handles the entire data removal process for you. It does not stop there. Incogni continues to monitor these databases and requests new removals if your information appears again, keeping your data yours. Now that means fewer spam calls, fewer spam emails, and lots more peace of mind. So the second benefit If you care about the law like we do, you probably value public records and transparency. Now, the issue is that legal information that's used to be accessible in context is now scraped by data brokers, repackaged, and sold. And that can affect hiring, insurance, even search results. Now, Incogni uses privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA to contact data brokers to request removal of your information from commercial databases. Now, giving you full control over how your name appears online. That's so important because legal systems should protect your rights, not turn your past into profits. So you can get 60% off annual plans at incogni.com/angry with code ANGRY at checkout. It's risk-free. Incogni offers a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied. Live free from dangerous spam with Incogni. That's incogni.com/angry for 60% off annual plans.
So I'm old enough to remember one of our earlier episodes about Epstein. And you and I, we actually agreed on this one point that the civil actions is where there would be things that would be somewhat eye-opening, I suppose.
Right.
And guess what? All the stuff this week that has been released by the Congressional Oversight Committee. And guess what? That did not come from DOJ.
I know that. No, it came from the Epstein estate. And Todd Blanche lied, as far as I'm concerned. That's my opinion. That when Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, comes out and says, "Well, when I questioned Ghislaine Maxwell, I didn't have those emails because the estate withheld them from me." And then the estate comes out and says, "We've complied with every order." What happened was that the request that Blanche made didn't cover what was in the documents that the House got, and they didn't cover it because what Blanche should have done is given it to a professional prosecutor who has handled this case before, who knew what they were doing. But the reason Blanche wanted to do it the way he did it was this whole interview with Ghislaine Maxwell was a ruse. It was bullshit. And it was done so they could get sound bites saying that Donald Trump was a great guy and did nothing wrong. And maybe he didn't, but that's what they wanted. And that's why they sent her to a minimum security prison camp the next day. So you know that.
Well, look, anybody who would argue she didn't get a benefit, I would say, look, you obviously have never dealt with BOP, because where she went from a facility that was onerous to one that is, I wouldn't call it luxurious, but let's just say it's not bad. That I'm not going to argue with. However, I wouldn't condemn Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche is a frontline, accomplished trial lawyer who knows what he's doing. I have seen no evidence that Todd Blanche is somebody who would sell out his integrity just to kind of further the executives. When he says, "I didn't have these from the estate could have, by the way, the estate could have asserted privileges. The estate could have not cooperated with Congress. There are some very good reasons.
But they did.
Yeah.
And so if they did with Congress, they would have with Todd Blanche had he asked for the documents, because they came out hours after Todd Blanche made this allegation against them we've released everything they asked us for.
Yeah, I don't disagree. A DOJ subpoena, grand jury subpoena, is going to be tantamount to a congressional oversight subpoena, if that's what you're doing.
Right.
The fact remains that they have DOJ files. They know what they have in the files. I understand that that feeds the conspiracy theory that he's got something to hide.
Well, what is he doing? I mean, Mark, why is he acting like, why is he running for the hills?
Well, I don't know that he's running for the hills, but this is let me tell you what I think is happening. Look at the emails that have been released. You've reported on them.
Yeah.
I watched last night people talking breathlessly on one side of the aisle about, the dog that wouldn't bark, or talking about, he knew about the girls. There isn't a single one of those, unless you're predisposed to want to find him complicit in a conspiracy. Not a single one of those is actionable in terms of him being guilty of anything.
I don't think the issue is him being guilty. I think the issue is go back to Watergate. What did he know and when did he know it? And when you go back to 2011 and Jeffrey Epstein is emailing Ghislaine Maxwell, Donald Trump is the dog that didn't bark and references cops. What is clear there is Donald Trump knew something untoward about Jeffrey Epstein. And I will tell you, and I know you know him, I've known Donald Trump since 2002 when I was doing Celebrity Justice. Donald Trump is a gossip. Donald Trump loves to gossip. And I'm not putting shade on that. A lot of people do. But Donald Trump, I had numerous phone calls with Donald Trump over the years. And he was a gossipy kind of guy. And, I'll give you one example. I was in his office once and he pointed out the window and I think he said, "That's my building over there." And then he tells me, and I'm not going to name the person because I don't know if it's true or not. And I don't think it's right to name him. But he said, "Yeah, so-and-so would bring women up to that apartment in that building." So he loved to gossip. The idea that he would...
This is where we will agree. I've been told a recent story of his gossiping, and also I'm not going to name the people involved for the same reason you did, not because it's the same person, but because he had conflated, which I do on more than one occasion, he had conflated a story about one lawyer with another lawyer, and it was not a flattering story.
I bet.
Yeah, and it was pretty, if someday maybe at your party, I'll tell you about it, but there is definitely that. Now, I will say this though, if I'm Trump, I keep coming back to, I banished this guy from Mar-a-Lago. I didn't like what he was doing at my club. I cut off all ties. Yes, we were close. Yes, we were running buddies. There's nothing illegal about that. And he did say, it's famously, he said, Epstein is a great guy or good guy, and he's known to like beautiful women just on the younger side.
And how does he know that? Because the two of them were buddies, and Epstein clearly told Donald Trump about a lot of escapades. There's no doubt about that. And correct. Donald Trump does not wall himself off from that. Jeffrey Epstein told him stuff that Jeffrey Epstein was doing, and you know that. And it's undeniable. And Donald Trump is trying to act like barely knew him, and it's like, come on. You think it just has to do with stealing women from Mar-a-Lago? And by the way, why was Virginia Dufresne even on Donald Trump's radar? A 17-year-old girl working in the spa. Why would Donald Trump even know that? And he did.
Because I guarantee.
And I'm not saying he did anything wrong. I'm just saying he knew what was up.
Okay. And I'm telling you what I suspect happened is it trickled up, so to speak. There was untoward behavior going on in one part. It finally gets to the boss finds out, and the boss does something. I just haven't seen anything so far. And by the way, if it's congressional Democrats who are leaking the material, or leaking maybe too strong, who are releasing the material. They're releasing the material for a purpose. They want to galvanize a political purpose. They want to galvanize the parts of the Republicans base that is anti-Epstein and try to turn them into anti-Trump and coalesce with the Democrats. It's a political ploy, and I just haven't seen anything that leads me to believe this guy has done anything remotely criminal.
But Mark, it's not about him doing anything criminal. He may have done nothing criminal, but if he has the information, if he knows what Jeffrey Epstein is doing and maybe joking with him about it because he's the dog that didn't bark, then that doesn't look good. Billy Bush got fired for laughing at a Donald Trump joke, which was tasteless, but he got in trouble for laughing. Donald Trump would essentially be doing that same laugh at Jeffrey Epstein. So I think that's what he's worried about.
Right. But we started this off with a comparison to Nixon. Nixon had knowledge of and involvement in a crime, a felony crime, and directed at his enemies. That there was then the cover up. That is not what we're talking about here. Nixon, if he was involved in the obstruction and potentially the crime, here there's nothing that indicate that he's involved in a crime with Epstein.
I agree. I agree with you, but that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is sometimes there is a scandal so big that it defines the president. That, on the good side, I mean, Abraham Lincoln, he ended the Civil War. He ended slavery. And that's what you think of. There's a lot more to Lincoln, but that's what you remember. There are headlines you remember. Roosevelt was the New Deal. And I think Nixon was clearly Watergate. I'm not talking about a crime. I'm talking about a headline. And the headline for Donald Trump, if he keeps doing what he's doing, is going to be Jeffrey Epstein. I really believe that. Because this is building. Mark, where it is right now is not where it's going to be a month from now. Because if the House passes this resolution, and if it goes to the Senate, and if the Senate passes it, and I don't know they're going to, but if they do, and it goes to Donald Trump's desk, he's going to veto it, right?
How many votes do you need in the Senate? Because I know you need 218 in the House. Do you know how many votes in the Senate?
I think it's a majority, but the Republicans have the majority. He could win. The Senate could vote to release, but if they do, what do you think Donald Trump's going to do when it goes to his desk? You think he's going to sign it?
Well, that's a great hypothetical.
What do you think?
I think it's going to pass the House. I think that's the sole reason for those who aren't in the week.
We know
the
that.
woman who won the special election, the Democrat, provided the 218th vote. By virtue of that 218th vote, that would then force the issue to go to the Senate. I'm not sure the number of votes at the Senate.
Let's say it passes the Senate.
Yeah, if it passes the
Senate, what's Trump going to do?
He's not going to sign it.
Correct. So let me just give you another analogy here. That Donald Trump is losing his grip over MAGA legislators, members of Congress. That's clear. That the House, they're defecting left and right now in the House. And as the public pressure grows, I think you're going to see it generally in MAGA. Marjorie Taylor Greene has defected. Lauren Boebert has defected, and a lot of others. So here's my analogy, that in Russia, before the Soviet Union was dissolved, everybody wore gray coats because that was the nature of, that you couldn't stand out. You were
gray coats to red hats.
I know that's not that's not the point I'm making. Everybody wore gray coats. When the Soviet Union dissolved, then all of a sudden, the Gap eventually came in there, and all of a sudden, people are wearing red coats and green coats and blue coats because they discovered freedom, and it just exploded where they thought, wow, I don't have to live this way anymore. And all of a sudden, you saw them exercising freedom. The analogy I'm making is Donald Trump had a death grip on his MAGA legislators in Congress. And they were all afraid to defect in any way because they'd get primaried and thrown out. Now they're realizing, hey, that doesn't necessarily happen when it comes to the government shutdown, when it comes to Epstein, when it comes to affordability. And now they're saying, hey, we can live without living in this death grip. And it may just blow the House open so that Donald Trump loses his hold entirely because his MAGA base in Congress has discovered freedom. And I think that I can see that happening.
I think the only way that catches on fire is that there's a economic setback that triggers it a la 2008. And unless there's something like that, I subscribe to the James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. And the idea that they're too unified. They are too monolithic in terms of the lockstep. And all you have to do is look at how the government shutdown got foisted onto the Democrats, and the Democrats waited until the 2 days after the election to fold on the government shutdown. And then everybody was saying, oh, so this was all calculated by them to win the election. So I'm just not so sure. The Democrats have an unerring instinct to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah, but it's not happening this time. And I got to tell you, the people are blaming this on the Republicans. I mean, everybody remembers Mike Johnson keeping the House out for an entire season. So, people remember that, and they're blaming it on the Republicans because the fact is they're the ones in power. They're the ones in power everywhere. So it's on them. And I think when you look at, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is so important here that she has been able to, on the one hand, say, I love Trump, but, and then she gives this litany of things that she's breaking from him on.
You're not the only person that I've heard who said, I can't believe I'm agreeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I'm like stunned that I just think she's so reasonable now. When you listen to her, and then you see somebody like Lauren Boebert, who is just being corralled in the Situation Room to change her view, and Donald Trump couldn't do it. He couldn't change Lauren Boebert's view on Epstein. If she can stand up to him, everybody can stand up to him.
So do you believe that he has complicity, he being President Trump, with Epstein? And when I say complicity, you're not suggesting that you think there's some smoking gun in the DOJ, or that there's this picture, the much ballyhooed picture of him sitting with naked women or things of that nature. Is that what you're suggesting?
No. And this will be a guess. I think it's more that they've interviewed people in that circle who have said, yeah, I overheard a conversation where Jeffrey Epstein was bragging about blah, 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 and Donald Trump was listening and laughing. Something like that, where Donald Trump was aware of, this is my guess, aware of the things or some of the things Jeffrey Epstein was doing and never became a barking dog. I think that's what he's concerned about, that he's going to look like he...
Barking dog email was directed from Jeffrey Epstein to who?
To Ghislaine Maxwell.
Correct. And so that we tie this in a bow, what people are now complaining about is, why didn't you ask Ghislaine Maxwell about what the barking dog?
No, that's not true. What they're complaining about is that there is another email where it's very clear that Donald Trump spent hours at Jeffrey Epstein's home, and that Donald Trump was there. And Ghislaine Maxwell said, yeah, I've been thinking about that. So she knew that he was spending time at Epstein's home. But when Todd Blanche asked her the question, she said, no, I don't recall him ever being at Jeffrey Epstein's home. So that's just a lie. That's just a lie.
Or she'd forgotten, and you got to show her the email to refresh her recollection.
That would be interesting to forget something like that, because that is so central to what is going on right now. That's a detail you would think she wouldn't forget. And yeah, it would have been great had Todd Blanche gotten that email, but apparently he didn't ask for it.
Well, by the way, he's running down certain things. She, at the time he interviewed, if I'm not mistaken, if you have a timeline, she still had a pending cert petition in front of the SCOTUS. So there are, and Dave Marcus, who was her lawyer, is an exceptional lawyer. I'm sure that there were some contours to what he could and couldn't do, although everybody said she answered every question.
Todd Blanche isn't saying that. Todd Blanche isn't saying I couldn't ask her that. Todd Blanche is saying, yeah, the estate, they were withholding documents from us. They didn't give us what we asked for. And then the estate comes out and says, hey, we've complied with everything. It's clear, however it was framed, whatever they asked for, didn't cover this. Because if the estate wouldn't give it to Todd Blanche, they're certainly not going to give it to the Democrats in the House.
Right. I agree. They both come at you with the same force. Right. A congressional subpoena actually, in some ways, is less scary than a DOJ subpoena.
Yeah, because of the consequences.
Right. So what are you saying? You're just saying that he's that you're saying Donald Trump is Billy Bush, not Ghislaine Maxwell?
Well, I hate to say that about Billy Bush because I think Billy Bush got
I
fucked.
love Billy
I
Bush, and
think
I
Billy Bush got
did a
fucked. I
job.
mean, I think the idea that the Today Show fired him, NBC fired him, is so outrageous because any good reporter has been face to face with somebody who said something really offensive or appalling, and you want to get the interview, so you just kind of laugh it off. And that's all Billy Bush did. And they fired him. And NBC knew about this interview because it had been done a long time before it eventually came out, and they didn't do anything until it became public. So Billy Bush was a scapegoat. But yeah, I think this is way more than Billy Bush. Donald Trump, I think,
Wait, so
laughed.
you think you lean Donald Trump is more Billy Bush? Is Billy Bush on steroids?
I think he's Billy Bush on steroids. That you look at what Donald Trump may have known if Jeffrey Epstein. They talked about women and girls all the time. They talked about young women. They talked about girls. That's Donald Trump, and especially back in the day, and you know that. So Jeffrey Epstein's bragging to Donald Trump, and he's the dog that won't bark. So now the thing is, are there things in that file that say, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein told Trump X, Y, and Z back in 2010? That's not going to look good for Donald Trump. There's some reason he is doing somersaults not to release the files. If it's
Let me ask you another question that makes zero sense to me. When we talked about subpoenas or this or that, the idea that somehow the estate has documents, emails involving Ghislaine Maxwell, and that Ghislaine Maxwell is sitting in custody, having gone through trial, been convicted, lead prosecutor Maureen Comey. The Maureen Comey that I've got a limited experience with, there is no chance that she wouldn't have had all that material. No chance that she would have gone to trial.
You've just indicted Todd Blanche then, because if it was in the Justice Department file, how on earth can he? He said he didn't have it, Mark. He said he didn't have that.
I don't know what to me, the more interesting question is, how is it that the estate has stuff that the DOJ doesn't, is a more fundamental question, only because I know the DOJ not only doesn't leave any rock or stone unturned, they are so excessive and obsessive when it comes to investigation that, and mind you, this was not this, I mean, it was the previous administration, one before, that was out there doing everything possible. It strains my ability to believe it, based on doing this for 40 years, that DOJ didn't have the material. And if they didn't have the material, why is the estate now releasing it selectively to Congress?
Well, couple of things. Number one, they're releasing what they're asked to give. And what you do is you have to frame. You can't say, give me everything in the estate. You got to frame it. You got email.
Have you ever seen a grand jury subpoena?
I understand that. Give me communications between Ghislaine Maxwell and
Jeffrey Epstein.
And Jeffrey Epstein. Give me the reverse. Give me anything with Trump. I mean, obviously, you do it that way. The way it sounds is that Todd Blanche didn't ask the right questions to get the documents he wanted. But if you're right that the Justice Department had all this when they prosecuted her and or him, then it's even worse, because then it's a cover-up. That if it was in the file and Todd Blanche didn't challenge her when she said, I have no recollection of him ever being, Donald Trump ever being at Jeffrey Epstein's house. What Todd Blanche should have done is, wait a minute, the Justice Department file, it says here that you were thinking about it when Epstein mentioned to you that Trump spent hours at my house. So then it's a cover-up. Which is your choice? It's, you got two bad choices.
Also, it could just be sheer incompetence. I mean, by the way, the breadth and depth of documents, if you believe what was reported, is there were 1,000 people, 1,000 personnel going through the DOJ files on this case or on this matter. there's no way Todd Blanche was doing it. Todd Blanche there's not enough hours in the millennia to have Todd Blanche himself go through all
He
this.
shouldn't have been the one to question her. It should have been somebody who was working on the case who knew. Look, he did this because he was on a mission. He was on a mission to exonerate Donald Trump from even an appearance.
I don't know that I agree with that. I didn't think that questioning was a series of softballs. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised at the kind of follow-up that he was doing in that. Did you read the transcript?
Yes, he never asked her. He never drilled her on because I heard a victim on a show, and I forgot what show, where she said she had seen Donald Trump at the house, and so at a point. You got it. What about that? I mean, and there were never any follow-ups there. And there was never a follow-up on this email.
I know you hate it when I do this, but I'm always a little bit more cynical in terms of I adopt what prosecutors always say when I allege a conspiracy is, do you really think the federal government is that competent that they could do a conspiracy like this? And my response is, you're probably right, and the but here is, we have statements that somebody said who was intimately involved with the original deal with Epstein, that it was his contacts were above their pay grade, and that there was the suggestion was the intelligence community had leaned on them. Now, my friend Alan Dershowitz says if anybody would have known, I would have known, I being Alan Dershowitz, because I would have tried to trade on that. Although cynics would say, no, you wouldn't, Alan, and they would go off on a conspiracy theory. Do you think, or is it in the realm of possibility, that he had intelligence connections? I don't know that he was an operative as much as an asset. And I will tell you, for those who don't think it happens, I can attest to the fact assets, meaning people who cooperate with the government, are at the highest levels, or their names you and I both know and talk about every single day. And you think he was an asset, and that is where all of this kind of shrouded in mystery as to why they're doing this.
I don't know. I don't know. All I know is Donald Trump clearly has something to hide. And he has always been able to will his version of the truth on the American people. He's just been a genius at that. And I think what happens, there's this saying, as you know, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, I think absolute power actually works the opposite, that absolute power takes power away because somebody becomes so drunk with power that they think they can just will anything they want. And eventually they cross the line. And I think he's crossed the line. I think he's crossed the line with Epstein. I think he's crossed the line with the economy, but Epstein for sure. And he just thinks that he can do what he's always done, which is bully people into believing his version. And people have stopped doing that. And he doesn't realize it. He is walking on a railroad track and the train is coming to run him down. And he doesn't realize it because he's always been able to get away clean. And I don't think he's going to get away clean this time. And the reality is, whatever is in that file, I don't know how manageable it is. Maybe it's going to be terrible, but this is going to be his legacy. This will be what people remember of Donald Trump, because I know we're now in November of 2026, but as we get, or 2025, but as we get into 2026 and this thing builds and builds and builds, and then he vetoes this resolution and it explodes, and then everybody is clamoring and talking and they start an impeachment thing and the whole business, it's going to be so much worse for him than it would if he just released it now. But I don't think he's going to. I think he is so down that road that he can make anything happen that he wants to make happen, that he's not realizing this is different.
Well, there's a couple of other scenarios as well. He could sign it, and then the DOJ could go to the U.S. Supreme Court and say, we're not complying, that Congress has violated the separation of powers, and they've got no right to get into our files. And I don't care, they could be unanimous, but they are the legislative branch. We are the executive branch, and we at DOJ are going to tell you to go pound sand, Congress, because you've got an oversight role, but you certainly aren't you don't have the role to come in here and order the DOJ around to do what it does. And by the way, Congress, where were you when you were complaining about the executive's unitary executive privilege theory? And so I'm not so sure that it's that simple. I will tell you, if the Democrats take the House next year in November, less than a year from now, yes, that changes all calculations, because then you're in a 2-year run until the run up to who is the successor to Donald Trump, put aside all the third term nonsense, but you're in a 2-year sprint, and then you're going to see all hell break loose if the Democrats win the House.
You know, I hear what you're saying, but in terms of going to the Supreme Court and saying you're violating separation of powers, didn't work in Watergate. The Congress was able to get the audio tapes, and Nixon's position wasn't well, he did try executive privilege. Nixon's position ultimately was, I should have destroyed the tapes. But
by the way, if Nixon now had the benefit of the
immunity,
yes, Nixon would have served out his term.
I don't think that's right, and I'll tell you why. It means they probably couldn't prosecute him, but it doesn't mean he doesn't have to turn the documents over. He just says, yeah, you can't prosecute me for it. But the documents would still have to be turned over. And
no, because the only remedy is an obstruction. You can't prosecute. So you just run out the clock while you're still president.
Yeah. Good luck selling that to the public.
Well, that's a political calculation. I'm talking about a purely legal calculation. Purely legal calculation is obviously the powers that be understood what happened, what Nixon's kind of they would view his mistake was. They remedied that mistake. SCOTUS gave him the ammunition, and that's why he's back in the presidency.
So then can we end this by agreeing that if you're right on that he just runs out the clock, it is the classic example of winning the battle and losing the war, because the war is his legacy and his legacy is Epstein, if you're right?
I just remember Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, and no matter what happened, as long as the economy was humming along, Clinton was at a 70% approval rating. As soon as the economy tanks like it did in 2007, then all bets are off.
Well,
it's always the economy.
People aren't humming the economy these days.
Well, you take a look at the New York mayoral election, which they threw everything at Zoran.
And he won. And he won because people think the economy sucks.
By the way, I have yet to meet a person under 35 who didn't vote for him.
I agree. Me too. My whole office. I'm going through the same thing.
It's absolutely across the board.
I know. Okay. Good talk. I will see you next week.
See you next week, Harvey.